Today, I have the pleasure to talk with James Blackburn, probably the smartest guy I've talked to yet on one of these podcasts. We'll see if he can prove it. James, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm feeling really smart.
Are you good? Good. Yeah, you look it. You look like a
Oh
smart.
yeah, yeah. After I've just come back 2 weeks from Africa, and I have to tell you, I finally have escaped jet lag, but I'm not sure my brain's totally engaged yet. But we'll see.
Okay, so I have a chance. Maybe I can spar with you a little bit, and keep up with you at the very least. I really want to hear about you and how you got to where you are, and your motivations, and just tell me about you and your work you're doing and carbon and all that kind of stuff.
Well, my career starts back in law school, which I hated. And I told my wife I was, didn't like law. And of course, she was working to help put both of us through this time period. And I
Wow.
was working as well, but didn't like law school. And she had been talking to a friend at a party and said, "Well, have you thought about environmental law?" And I hadn't. And I decided that I would like to become a environmental lawyer. I'd grown up hunting and fishing, wrote a paper, made the lowest grade in my class, won a national contest with the same paper, got a fellowship to come to Rice University and study environmental science. And I got a master's after my law degree, and that totally changed my kind of direction. And since
Wow.
that time, I've been, some years I do much more environmental law, and I've pretty much retired now as an active litigator, but I was an active litigator for 30, 40 years as an environmental lawyer. I've always been teaching at Rice. I started in 1975 in architecture and now teach in civil and environmental engineering. I'm co-director of the Severe Storm Center at Rice and also participate at the Baker Institute. And then I'm also have been a planner and have had a planning firm because frankly, I was on the environmental side of issues in Texas in the 70s and 80s, and there weren't a lot of people hiring an environmentally oriented lawyer. So I had to be very versatile. And then over the years, the research that I did led me to climate as an issue. Severe storms and climate are very much linked. Got to studying climate responses, and we decided that nature was an important part of the response that needed to be emphasized in dealing with climate. We're trying to figure out how to pay Texas landowners to keep their land natural and basically enjoy the ecological functions that these lands provide. And our economic system doesn't reward landowners for ecologic function. So I got into the carbon credit market where we pay landowners for managing their land to bring more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere because photosynthesis is the best technology ever developed for removing carbon from the atmosphere. And I'm retired as the CEO of BCarbon, which is a carbon credit registry. We started really out of Rice University. It's a nonprofit. I'm still chairman of the board of BCarbon. I still teach at Rice. I'm teaching a course in sustainable design this semester, and I'm still doing research and writing, and frankly, really enjoying life these days.
I love creative, and what an interesting kind of a path of career to take. So tell me about. I'd love to hear how did you how do you make a company when there's really no demand, real potential demand for a product, and meaning carbon, carbon
Well,
credits, and how do you get money to fund that?
I mean, this is where it makes a difference to be a nonprofit organization rather than a for-profit organization. Now, either with either you can raise money, but with a nonprofit you can go to philanthropy. And so we can go to foundations, we can go to individuals that are interested in what we're doing, and they could get tax deductions. And so early on, B Carbon was formed as a 501c3 IRS nonprofit, makes donations tax deductible. We have received donations from corporations, from individuals, from foundations, and that's what kept us going in the early days. As a carbon credit registry, we develop protocols. These are rules. There is no law in the United States that controls the issuance of carbon credits. It's a very interesting situation. As an environmental lawyer, we are always looking at statutes and rules and that. Well, there are none relative to climate in the United States for the most part, except in California. So it's a very interesting kind of open situation. And we basically took the money from the philanthropies and used it to develop our own set of rules for how we would be issuing carbon credits. We emphasized testing and the science background that we had from Rice. And so I think we're probably among let's say we're trying to make our credits as credible as we can from a science standpoint. As one buyer told me, if we want to know that we're buying something real. And if you're storing carbon in the soil, you can't see it.
Yes.
So how do you know it's really happening? Well, measurement is very important. And so we have gotten seriously into measuring soil carbon, the carbon in the coastal marshes, the carbon in the forests. And so we probably emphasize that more than any of the registries.
Yeah, I like that because people want to know they're actually getting what they're buying, just like in any product or service, carbon being just like that. So you measure it. What else, like starting this nonprofit, what were some of the biggest challenges you had and how did you overcome them?
Well, I mean, initially it was and still is, finding buyers for these credits. There is no legal requirement to buy these credits. This is for every corporation these days, they've got a carbon plan. Uh, this is a great change probably in the last 10 years. Probably 10 years ago, many of these companies didn't have good data about what we call the carbon footprint, how much carbon dioxide they're emitting, how many tons per year. And then they are developing plans to get to net zero by 2050. That is the goal of the Paris Accords. And that's pretty much the uniform, I would say, expectation of corporations that by 2050, they will be to net zero. But there's no clear pathway as to how to get to net zero. And if I were advising a corporation, I would say, first of all, you try to try to avoid direct emissions. If you could go to solar or to wind, I'd recommend doing that. If most companies don't have the land to put a wind farm or a solar farm up, but if you could do that, that would be great. And you certainly might want to try to begin to green up your electricity, but you also want to become much more efficient with your internal operations. If there are ways that you can reduce the amount of carbon dioxide per unit of product created, then you try to do that. Those are the long-term solutions internally that every company is looking for. But some companies have promised, for example, a 50% reduction by 2030, trying to be kind of what's called a down payment on the 2050 commitment. Most companies will be short of that 2030 commitment. And that's where nature-based carbon dioxide comes in. That's where you may want to pay a landowner to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it on their land for a long period of time for you. And so as a corporation, you would basically be making a contract with a project developer and a landowner to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, prove it, and basically store your emissions by removing them and putting them in nature. And that is mind-boggling to a lot of the buyers. And then in 2022, the market had some, I would say, poor performance reports. Some of the carbon credits were actually pure fraud. You had a forest fire that destroyed about 50,000 acres of carbon credits, I think, in Oregon. You had just some misrepresentations. I'm not saying they were intentional, but the credits just didn't prove up to be as good as they were represented. And so, none of these companies that are buying want to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for the wrong reasons. And so that really set the market back. And so now what we find is the companies are very risk averse. And so credibility of the credit is the number one criteria. Being a nonprofit, working on measurement, that helps us a lot. We are seeking at BCarbon, we are seeking international certification through a group called ICROA, and that is underway at the time. And that will also help increase confidence of the buyers. And ultimately, that's going to be the key. I don't think we anticipate hundreds of millions of tons of carbon credits to be transacted by 2030. We're nowhere close to that now. And so there's going to be a big growth in the nature-based carbon market, we think, in the next certainly the next 5 years. And we need to get the project developers started. I think that's one of the biggest kind of unknowns here is the lag time between a buyer deciding actually they want to buy these credits and being able to provide the millions of tons of credits that they may need. The volume of these credits will be huge. Globally, we're talking 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. If 10% of those are made up by nature, that's 4 billion tons. It's probably going to be more like 12 to 15%, which would be up in the 10 to 15 ton range. And at a ton an acre, 3 tons per acre, that's a lot of acres. And that's a lot of deals to put together between certainly now and 2050, but probably half that much between now and 2030.
Wow. Okay. So just to really, really keep this simple, as I understand it, in my limited capacity, basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, landowners, plant trees or plant whatever, preserve your land, don't develop it. We're going to pay you for that to harvest carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Is that right?
You got it. That's the basic idea. Now, there's a concept in international circles called additionality, and we really don't want to pay landowners just for what they've been doing. We'd like them to change their practices and bring more carbon dioxide down. So for example, you can manage cattle in a way that, a lot of times we just let the cows out. They just kind of walk around and chew what they want. There are ways to organize the grazing more like the buffalo. It's called regenerative grazing or mob grazing. And you can basically put more carbon into the soil with some of these techniques. We're finding that better water management will increase the amount of carbon. And during drought, you may want to take your cattle off much quicker. And so there are things that can be done to increase and maintain your carbon yields, but there's not enough of a market yet for there to be algorithms that have been developed. And so this is a huge learning process that we have ahead of it. We're basically evolving a new economic system. And I don't know that that's really been publicized a lot, but we're bringing nature into the economy. We're also basically, carbon is almost becoming more of the commodity even than money. I think you'll find carbon content of products becoming more and more and more important. And I think price will be related to carbon content. Low carbon content, higher price, because that means that the companies don't have to offset a carbon footprint that somebody else has made, but that you're buying with a product.
Interesting. Interesting. So, I never would have thought of carbon as a monetary measurement. So that's kind of mind blowing. So tell me about, as you were developing this whole idea, this nonprofit, what's one thing that you would do differently if you could do it again?
Well, I think we misunderstood how risk averse the buyers were. I think what we thought as a nonprofit, we needed to stay neutral. And by that, I mean, we would talk with buyers, we'd talk with project developers, landowners, but we probably didn't reach out and interact as much with buyers as I would if I were starting over, because the buyers have to be comfortable with your system. And that is, I think, probably emerged as the central biggest idea. And we're making up for that now. We're starting to really interact much better with buyers. But that was probably a mistake made out of an abundance of caution. We didn't want to appear too linked to a buyer group, and we wanted to try to certainly maintain independence, which we have, and I think which we can do. But I do think the buyers have to become more engaged in the process. I think if the buyers actually help develop the protocols, they will feel better. It turns out the buyers are actually much more stringent than I would tell you that the environmental groups are, for example, or that the public is, because they're so worried about being exposed for greenwashing and just all of these ways in which the media can portray a company these days. They're, I think, rightfully nervous about it. I just don't think we understood that nearly as much as we do now.
That's really interesting because I've I've seen it happen a lot with companies, whether it be a nonprofit or for-profit company. You've got an idea or a product or a concept, and many companies will iterate that instead of testing it out in the marketplace. And if they would test it in the marketplace faster, they would get better feedback, faster feedback, and they would actually come out with a product or service that is what the customer or buyer wanted instead of what they thought they wanted.
No, I agree with that very much. And I think it's also, I would also, I think, emphasize more that this was an evolutionary or is an evolutionary process.
For
And
sure.
there's failures in evolution. And, this isn't 100% bet because this is new stuff. And I mean, apart from fraud and the intentional wrongdoing, there's some honest mistakes that are going to get made. And I think to be really out front with that, and if we could get the companies to be out front with the fact that, look, we're trying this. We are
Yes.
working on a new problem. This carbon footprint is something we've never emphasized. We think it's important. We may make mistakes, but we're going to make them for the right reasons. And I think if they would just be out front like that, it would help them tremendously.
Yeah, that's the thing. Sometimes no good deed goes unpunished. And I feel like in this situation, these companies are trying to do the right thing. And sometimes they chose the wrong, let's call it vendor or partner to do the work with. And that person wasn't doing the right thing. Therefore, the company looks bad when in fact their intent was to do something good for the world. Correct?
And I think this is really kind of a real mark of our times. I think we 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 are all involved in a gotcha type of world right now, where I mean, there's so many people that are trying to put out news, if you will. Controversy is better selling, or kind of probably
Yes.
of more interest than is making things work.
Yes.
And in this environment, it is hard to innovate. And
Yes.
particularly on things like this that are, I mean, there's an interpretive side to this, whether people think, one, you should even try to offset a footprint. There are those that want to get rid of the oil and gas industry. And I mean, that's not happening anytime soon, but there's a lot that would like to smear. There's quite a number of people that like to see that happen. So they're looking for anything that could be negative about an oil and gas industry. I think that type of mindset, where you're looking for things to exploit, really works against innovation. It really works against problem solving. And really, so much of what I'm involved in now is problem solving, trying to come up with solutions.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's a couple things I'm spot on with you. First of all, when did we stop assuming positive intent? If you assume positive intent, the way people are talking with you, the way companies are trying to do things, that's a lot different than a gotcha mentality. It will also get you a lot further down the road in the right way. And then the other thing I was going to say, I love that you bring up mindset because to me, mindset is the first thing that is going to give you success or failure. It's what do I set my mind on and how do I move towards that? And if I set my mind on negative things, I'm going to get a bunch of negative things or interpret them as negative, versus if I set my mind on positive things and positive intent, I'm going to see positive things.
It's easy to be against something. It is much harder to be for something. And I think if we just focused on trying to be for things, find things that you can support and support them rather than spending your time being negative about other people's interpretations and intents, I think we'd do much better as a society.
Hey man, that's absolutely brilliant. 100% agree. And I thought that, mentioning oil and gas, not everybody. There's a group of people that think oil and gas is the evil enemy. Well, in fact, everything that they're doing and the plastics and all the things that they're using every day are byproducts of oil and gas. And in fact, oil and gas has a lot of green initiatives they're working on that are going to make the world a better place.
Well, I mean, I think that the thing that gets me, I mean, I think back to my parents and the generation that they grew up in, and it was, you had the Depression, you had World War II, particularly with my parents. And, you know, they grew up in a world that was discovering hydrocarbons. And it was this wonderful reserve of energy that was, and we were smart enough to figure out how to use it. And I mean, I spent my whole life enjoying the benefits of hydrocarbons. And we have an economy for the world that's oriented around hydrocarbons. I think it's unrealistic to think that we are going to just transform that 2026, 2027, whole new economy. Not happening.
Yes.
But we are learning that what happened with that economic boom has consequences we're going to have to deal with. And
Yes.
so we're in a transformation. It's, a new economy will emerge. I call it the circular economy. I think that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation came up with that concept early on, but we're going to be mimicking nature. And I think, for example, the carbon cycle is part of nature. I mean, nature basically pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere with photosynthesis, but that's not the way we were designed 100 years ago. That's the design for the future. And it's going to be, I have what I call earth rules. There are just some kind of fundamental facts about the earth that we're going to have to get in sync with. And, that's where I see the solutions. In my case, earth can tell us what the solutions are. Earth's been doing it for about 4 billion years. And, there's a lot of failures in there, but there's also a lot of success. And I think we have ignored the earth for too long. And I think it's just a wonderful kind of lesson in where we should be headed. And I think we can shape our economy to fit that much better. But nature has a really kind of a beautiful fabric in its design.
Yes.
And I think that companies will be moving more and more in that direction with their economic systems. And I think those are the ones that are going to really succeed, will be those that basically adapt to the circular economy concepts, that begin to zero out their carbon footprint. And I think ultimately we'll be bringing more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere than we put into it. But that's going to be over long after I'm gone. And, it's kind of on the one hand, it's a burden that we're putting on our youngsters, that they're going to have to basically address this. But again, it's a transition to a different economic structure. There's going to be opportunities, there's going to be jobs, and everybody's freaking out about AI and things like that. I think AI is part of that solution. And I think that we will find a lot of jobs in adapting basically to nature. And they'll be very satisfying jobs as well, because I have found that spiritually, when I'm connected with nature, I get something more than just a paycheck.
Connecting on a deeper level with nature, helping humanity out in some big way. Those are great whys that will give us, not only give us enjoyment, but help us through the hard times.
But and that's kind of the fun part about where I am in my career. I'm pretty old now, and it's nice to be at a place where I feel at peace with kind of what I have done in my past, but also kind of what I'm still doing. I'm still in a position to be able to develop these ideas
Yes.
and to try to help them get implemented in various ways. And I teach young people at Rice University, so I have the opportunity to kind of watch these ideas. And some days you see that you're just not making any contact at all, and other days you can kind of see the light bulb go off, and they go, yeah, yeah. And the light bulb days are good. The blank stare days are not quite so good.
I love it. I'm sure you've had people come back to you years later and say, the thing you said at the one class really made such an impact on me, was huge.
I've had a few of those moments, and they're really, really special.
Give me one more. Since you brought up AI, I mean, everybody's talking about AI. So what is your point of view on AI and how it affects our world in the next 10 to 20 years, let's say?
Well, I have a good friend named Jed Anderson, who is an environmental lawyer.
Okay.
And I think his goal is to put the environmental law sections of all the big firms out of business, because a lot of what we do in environmental law is fill out forms and seek permits and things like that. But Jed was on the industry side, and he has basically been able to automate much of the database that exists at the state level with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And he's in a position now where he can make very much up to date, up to the minute applications, frankly, by pushing buttons. And what his point is that we need to liberate human thinking for the innovations. And there's a lot of replicable tasks that people do that are frankly somewhat boring, take up a lot of time. A lot of money is spent by companies for these tasks, but why not automate those tasks, get those done by the machine, and put people to work really solving and working on the issues that take people to solve them. And I think there's a concept he has that I can't quite remember, but it's basically let the machines do the replicable task and get humans doing the stuff that actually requires some thinking. Kind of, I won't say out of the box, but not something that the machine is able to replicate. And I think we'll find kind of the machine functions, and I think we'll find the human functions. And I think it in the long term will be more rewarding to the humans, although there's certainly those that think otherwise, but I mean, that's certainly, I think, an optimistic way of thinking about it. And I try to find the positives in a lot of these things. Not being a Pollyanna, there's a lot of negatives that have to be watched for. And I mean, I have litigated a lot of negatives, but right now I'm focused on the positives.
And I agree. I mean, if we can use AI to do the stuff that is just replicable tasks, and we can use it to sort of accelerate research and then use our brains to be creative and solve problems. And I think that's a nice balance. Then we're using the tool for tool stuff, and we're using the brain for brain stuff.
Yeah. There is, of course, this, this concept that AI will frankly be better than the human brain. And it's interesting. Jed tried to take some of the poetry that I've done and some of the spiritual writings that I've done and put it into his AI machine. And we had the AI program write poetry. But the poetry lacked the soul, the spirit of the stuff that I had written. And they don't have that figured out yet. So I think there's that side of it that I think is where it's going to be. I'm not going to say it's impossible for AI to get there, but it's, that's the niche that we have, which is that human part of being human. And I'm not sure we totally understand how to use that part of ourselves yet, but I think we'll see a lot more of that in the future.
That's awesome. AI does not have a soul, nor will it ever have a soul or a spirit. And maybe what's going to happen in the future is we're going to get more in touch with our soul and our spirit. And wouldn't that be a cool outcome using AI in new ways? I'll ask you one last question. I'll let you go. This has been awesome. What about, you talked about mindset. How do you stay in a positive mindset?
Well, we have a little place in the hill country, just sitting on the porch and listening to the birds and listening to the quiet and just enjoying that. That usually kind of resets me. And then I think, sitting down and writing, I just find if I start writing, I like to see what kind of just comes out. I'm not sure I had that, what'd you say, kind of appreciation of what could be. And I think understanding what could be is an important part of kind of where I've been and where I've come from and where I am. There's a lot that can be, and we can do it.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, James. I've thoroughly enjoyed our time. I've gained a lot of wisdom. I think you did prove that despite if you have jet lag, you are a smart guy. So,
but at least I can talk. So anyway, Warren, it's been a pleasure.
Oh, likewise. I wish you the best.